to kind of brainstorm, to think about what could be some ideas. We all use metal in our teaching, and some of you other, and what could be some ideas that we could generate together about where metal teaching can go, what are some of our experiences. I'll let Sarah give the introduction for us, so I'm not going to introduce my co-presenters. And we'll just go talk a little bit about some aspects and open the floor for really brainstorming ideas. I use metal in teaching in two contexts. I teach a course on religion and pop culture, and I have several modules in religion and video games, religion and various stuff like that. And one of the modules that I did was on religion and metal. And it was one of the main areas that I researched, so I thought it would be an easy module to do. And it was one of my most disappointing modules in that course. Not because there wasn't rich material, but it was hard to get students over the hump of saying cliche stuff like, oh, we're not really saying this. Oh, and things that we kind of all gotten to the point of realizing that it's much more complex, and we didn't get to the point of sort of saying anything meaningful about how to understand it. So from that disappointment, I designed a course that was entirely about heavy metal. And to sort of really delve into metal more systematically, well, not systematically in the sense that, okay, let's study the history of metal, but just have more engagement with all kinds of aspects of metal, with the sound, with the look, with different subgenres. And then as part of that, have a discussion about where religion fits into all of that big picture. And that course was much more successful. Not everything was about religion. It was just really, and not everybody who took the course was a metalhead, which was great. A lot of the students who signed up were because they were interested in metal, but not everybody. I had a few students who said before taking the course, I hated metal. I still hate it, but I think it's a lot more interesting. And really, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before turning over the floor, what I would like, metal as a culture, I think, seeks to sort of break boundaries and to transcend and to sort of, and I think what I would like metal to do in the classroom is to sort of point to different ways that we can be as teachers, as students, to point to different ways that learning can happen. I experimented a little bit with that in the course. One thing I had students do is I divided them into groups of 4 and said, you are a band. And as we go through the semester, as we read about different things, as we read about different discourse communities of metal, different subgenres, you need to make decisions about how your band expresses itself. What is the name of your band and why you chose a specific subgenre. They had to write their first song. Not necessarily write it, but sort of say what themes that song would be. Would it be Viking or stoner, and why they chose that, and things like that, and then they had to design a logo. So it was really creative, but also relating to what we were learning, and that was really fun, and I thought they got a lot out of it, but real learning happened. So that's where I would want metal teachers to go, to sort of be creative and just to sort of learn itself. I think writing is really great, and I really like this component. I think it can be creative, but not to sort of just, reproduce the kind of scholarship that and learning. I think we're teaching to make this one clear. I think it's really important. So I'm not, so anyway, so sorry.
Hello. So I'm a slightly off left field. So I'm a biblical scholar. I teach primarily Bible study in the UK. So this is not religious studies. It's textual scholarship. It's quite micro level. I do a lot of teaching on historical reception of texts and how they're used. And my primary place where I've used heavy metal is in a master's level course called The Bible and Church and Culture, I think it's called. And until I taught it, there was a week on the Bible and music, which was kind of exclusively handled on Bach. That was all, handled Bach and maybe a hymn. And so I sort of expanded it to there's a whole 20th century that's happened that maybe we could look at. What I use metal for primarily is to shift my students out of the box of what they think is appropriate. When I ask them to pick a subject to look at as a kind of artistic interpretation of biblical text and write about it, they feel like they have to go to something quite conservative. They just naturally do that. Most of my students are middle-aged church kind of people, even though the course is a very academic course. It sits inside the University of London. It's not a Bible college or anything like that. But I have a lot of ministers. I have a couple of priests. My last course had a non-Unitarian minister, a Salvation Army officer, 3 priests. So these are the kind of the demographic I'm working with. So I use it because just bringing in something totally different, which for them seems really extreme. And I started just by using Italian for reading deaf, which is what my papers are, so I'm trying to avoid giving them my paper before I give my paper. And that's all I use. What it means is that they feel like, well, I've gone so extreme. They can go, oh, actually, I have this song from my childhood that has the Bible in it, and that seems to have those themes, and they can use that. I've also done some work using Varda, they're a Swedish band. They did an album called Romans 5:12. So they stepped into my world, so I can and I've done a lot of work on that. The reason that I use Varda is because they do something very interesting. Like all that and black metal, they write complicated lyrics and then they obfuscate them. And as a textual scholar, there's something really interesting and challenging to say to a student, well, why would you write this complicated text and then make it so you can't hear it? Especially as Western academia is so text-focused, we're so logocentric, it's all about the word and the power of the word. And yet, this has then been subverted. So, what it does for my students is it makes them engage with the music as a text in itself. It makes them engage with those different layers. It's worked really well, but I've done it differently through years because the first year I went with full disclosure. I put Mark up on the screen, they knew that it was a metal band, and immediately the barriers went up. In fact, one of my students looked them up online while I was teaching and put up his hand and said, I just found a picture of them. I don't think these guys like Jesus very much. Which is my favourite ever quote about Marduk. Like, no! Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't think they like Jesus very much. It's the powers of my students that are online while I'm teaching. But then a barrier went up, right? So then they wanted to be critical. Clearly these guys are oppositional, they're doing something, they don't like the Bible, so I'm going to kind of be a bit antagonistic. The next year, I just gave them the lyrics to the album. And what I found was that my students loved them. So much so that one of my the Salvation Army officer guy is using Marduk's album in his Lenten Good Friday. I don't think Marduk will be very happy with. Because actually what Marduk do is quite a standard reading of Romans. And it's it can be used in lots of different ways. But again, what that does then is shows that there are many, many layers and many ways of using musical text, the text themselves, and it works as a brilliant exercise in hermeneutics. What you think this thing is before you arrive at it is going to influence how you read, it's going to influence how you interpret, and so it works really well that way. Didn't work so well when I did the music first, again, because it's just so jarring for them. They just couldn't get past the sound. And so I've been kind of I move it around and I kind of work with it. But I think metal, in my field anyway, there's something very interesting when you're studying text and you're so kind of work focused. This juxtaposition in metal quite often between beautiful lyrics but ugly sound, and I'm doing those in inverted commas. That's not a judgment thing, but beautiful lyrics versus ugly sound, again, helps teach about different elements of interpretation. And so it's been, very useful. But you can imagine I've had really interesting reactions from people who are kind of looking at me. But I think once I walk in anyway at the beginning of a term and they've come to do biblical scholarship and I'm the person who's teaching them, they're already a bit like, this is going to be interesting. She's not what we thought a Bible scholar looked like, so we get over that.
Coming to my presentation. So what I'm going to talk about very briefly is what I did last year at the University of Alberta. We had this thing called LMAP, All Night Against Procrastination, which took place between 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. where students came to the institution and they worked on their assignments, whatever they were working on. There were a whole bunch of different presentations given by different people. And I'll explain why I'm giving this playlist in a minute. And I was asked by a very good friend of mine if I could do a presentation from 4 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I said, are you kidding me? Nobody's going to come to this. I have nothing to say. You know, I'm a boring person by nature and so on. The only thing I can talk about my dog or metal music. She said, we'll talk about metal music. So I said, okay, fine. So what I did is I did lasting away writer's block with metal music. So it was an hour-long workshop where students came to this tiny room, and I was expecting about 42 came, which was absolutely fantastic. And we worked on different techniques of how to combat writer's block. So one of the techniques that I'm going to talk about very briefly, because I think we have just 5 minutes each, is we sat down and we wrote for 40 minutes non-stop, and they all brought their assignments with them, and I just played this playlist. And I told them, as the music changes, I want you to change the way you write. So if the music was kind of brutal and fast, they had to write faster. If the music slowed down, they had to write slower. If the music was something that they were not familiar with at all, they had to switch from computer to handwriting. They had a pen, they had a pencil, and we worked through it. We worked for about 45 minutes on this, and then we discussed how that helped or not helped. And then at the end, we also talked about how mood reflects how we're writing, and oftentimes because we can't get ourselves to write, it is a question of we're not in the mood of writing, so how do we combat that? So we also talked about which of these songs could be representation of your I hate this writing mood, or I can actually do it mood, and so on. So this was one of the techniques that I gave my students. So if you look at the playlist, because I didn't know who to expect, I picked songs that were safer, quote unquote. So I didn't have, I think they're safer, you know, compared to like Mayhem or something. So, you know, as we listened, and we just listened, so nobody had to pay attention to videos, nobody had to pay attention to lyrics, they just kind of got into the mood of writing under the influence of music. So, you know, these come from a variety of countries, and then we started with Antiphone, which is very German kind of, here comes the fuck, right? And everybody thought that they were saying, here comes the fuck. So you could see that people were what do you mean here, right? And I didn't feel I needed to explain this. And then, you know, they kind of slowed down with Cradle of Filth, and of course, once we get to baby metal, they're like, at the time, I think none of my students really knew what baby metal was, and after that, they came to me and said, what's that? And then, you know, 2 of them are not in love with baby metal. So I'm not sure if I did a good thing. So this was one of my strategies that was very successful, and a number of students later on told me that they're actually going to create their own playlist with music they like. They needed to stress it out that music I like, so not metal. And they're going to be using that. So that's all I have to say for this panel. So let's open up the floor for discussion.
My question is for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you like to include a creative aspect to your teaching, and I'll try to do that as well, but I always find that there are some students who are like, no, I can't be creative. I don't know how to be creative. I'm not going to try. Do you encounter that, and if so?
Yes, I mean, I had that fear, but I tried to sort of counter it by saying, at whatever level you feel comfortable. So if you are really oriented towards writing lyrics, write lyrics. If you just want to sit down and sort of describe the kinds of lyrics you want to talk about, if you were creative, you could do that. If you, instead of, you can't draw a logo, talk about, you know, find 5 band logos that you like and say these are the elements, so that even somebody who said I can't draw a logo or can imagine a logo could participate by Googling, you know, death and say this is the logo that I really like and these are the elements. And that allowed everybody to participate and everybody felt like they were included. Again, they're working with a group. Some of them I know kind of cheated and said, you know, you design your logo and just one person did it and they shared it. But a lot of them really did do the group process where they brainstormed logos and together looked at logos and decided this is the logo that we want. Some of them gave me 5 different logos and they couldn't decide and said, we like all of these. So everybody, and also there were different creative communities, both for the band and throughout the term. So everybody, the final project, I said, study any aspect of metal that you want and present it in any way, fashion that you want. Tell me what you're going to do ahead of time. So I had students that did websites about Persian metal. I had a student who did an oral history, like I said, a 2-hour oral history about the history of metal in Victoria, and then did a radio program and presented it. So he does a student radio, so he actually broadcast it. We had students. So, you know, I really let them engage in the way and using technology, using, you know, the web, Googling videos. I just want to quickly say that most of my teaching is like art teaching. So for me, that kind of course is precisely that sort of getting away from teaching text. I teach Bible and literature, so I have that same experience.
I just actually wanted to add something. I'm a teacher, and I'm a language photographer, and what I think is really interesting is that, and I think those people who can identify, especially the 3 of you, is that you're forcing people to step outside of their comfort zone. So hats off to you, because our culture, although we choose to often be a minority, our brothers force us to step outside of our comfort zone. So I'll be a child of church or whatever, you had to do the radio, every time you're on the radio, it's always something being thrown at us, and you're just like, yeah, okay, I want to talk to this, I gotta do it, I would like. So what you're doing, like plugging in these things that are so important to you, that you're actually changing people, whether they realize it or not. So it's awesome. That's all I wanted to say.
I just want to piggyback. I think part of what made that course really work is that I also step out of my comfort zone. I'm trained to teach text. I'm not trained as a musicologist. I'm not trained in the visual arts. I'm not trained to analyze, music videos. And together as a class, we're exploring these things. And I have students who have much more of a musical ear than me, who, when we're listening to it, they can talk about what's going on musically in ways that I can't talk about. And I welcome that and really sort of enriches the experience and gives them a sense of ownership as well.
Well, hi. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a counselor to kids that are in CCF custody and that have autism to a personality disorder. So Charlotte, when I watched your presentation in Helsinki, I did a group therapy session on online safety, so I printed out a card, and then I gave it to the kids, and I said, what kind of song do you think this is? And they said the same thing that your students did. They're like, oh, it's a song like you hear it in church, and then I played it for them. I was like, ugh. And they were all like, oh my god. And I said, this is like, when you meet a stranger online, they may look one way, but they may be something else. And I use it in the reverse way. Like, what do you think these lyrics sound like? Or like, I'll play the band that's all like, bleh. And then I say, but they're actually saying this, And I use, believe it or not, like the Metallica a lot of these kids, because they're all teenagers, and I think we all know the feeling of going to your room and blasting Metallica because no one understands you when you're like 14. So it's interesting how the genre really can help kids learn life skills and to learn to love themselves after a history of not having that in their life.
I think that's amazing. It's like, I think it's so interesting because I had this presentation previously. Looking at the layers of a musical text, you have to then look at those things, the juxtaposition of what's going on, and that means there are lots of different ways that you can apply it. And I now use the sort of method stuff I've done in teaching is now informing my work on first century texts, right? Because it's this issue of if I show them the lyrics, exactly that, I show them the lyrics and they decide it's one thing, and then I show them the music. And then we have a discussion about how much can we actually separate those things? Like how important is it, can we do that? Is it legitimate to take the lyrics out and just use them on that one? If they're composed with this sort of this was the thing. And then when I look at where my texts in the first century are, they're texts that are all pretty much all written to be read out loud, so they're being heard by audiences more than read, which again is a challenge. I mean, I'll talk about it in my paper. So there I'm looking at reception as hearing rather than reception as reading and those sorts of things. And I think Methel, because of these sorts of writers in this kind of beautiful constructed lyrics but complicated, difficult sounds to listen to, opens up a lot of that, which it's not that other types of music can't do it. I've used other types of music, but I think it's kind of primed and ready. It's really like, I mean, I kind of stumbled onto a win with an album titled Road as well. It's a bit of a nonsense, saying the same. I don't know, does he do that? but yeah, I think it's really creative what you've done with it.
I love hearing about all this metal teaching out there. It's fantastic. And I love hearing your perspective on things. I have a course too, actually, metal music, culture, and politics at Xavier University. We've gone about 5 or 6 years now.
Sorry, which university?
Xavier University, Cincinnati. And I'm a musician in the department. And, one thing that we do, we do a lot of this. Of course, this semester, the students are required to learn about 300 songs to correctly identify through playing. And not just the beginning of the songs. And I go through it, how to listen, how do you hear, how do you go through it. And what's so interesting about that is because I teach a lot of historical perspective. And if nobody makes you, if you're 18, if somebody doesn't make you listen to Flotsam and Jetsam, you're not going to just encounter that for my students. But I cover a lot of genres, and about 3 weeks ago, I received an email from a student I had approximately 4 years ago. No contact with this young woman. And she wrote me, of all things, about Def Leppard. And she said, I encountered Def Leppard for the first time in your class, and it changed my life. I'm not joking. These were the words she used. And she said about how this whole exposure to this music from the 80s that she named off like flannel bands. And she went through the profound impact it had on her. And she said, I would have never encountered these things unless your class. Back to your question about changing lives. This course that we teach and I teach, and it can be dismissed in some ways, whatever. But it isn't. It's serious stuff. It really is. And I just wanted to share that, the power that this stuff has to connect with students, this music 30, 40 years ago. You don't encounter necessarily every day anymore. And it also speaks to the power of the music itself, that it can connect with students, a generation removed from it, or more. Just a little comment on that.
There's something funny, isn't there, about when we talk about getting funding to come to a conference like this, and getting your modules through kind of whatever process you have to go through. And when I started, someone said, oh, well, you're just doing that because that's the thing you're into. And I thought, well, yes, partly. But when I looked at the course as it was written for the guy that wrote, that first did it, he just did the stuff that he was into. And because it had a high art content, and people think of it as legitimate, the fact that he was just really into Handel, no one said to him, well, you're just doing Handel because you really like it. Whereas I got this kind of like, is that just because? And actually, I think that it's important in scholarship that we start going, well, yes it is, but that is what all scholarship has been, right? It is that. Scholarship is doing the stuff that you want.
It's important for the students to learn that they can study what they're interested
Well, they're
in.
interested in, absolutely,
And
right?
that
Yeah.
it's okay.
It's okay.
It also doesn't ruin my interest, my love of metal, my teaching it, my studying it. It doesn't, people, I've had students in literature say, oh, studying Harry Potter ruined Harry Potter for me because now I see how it's bad literature. And then whoever taught that course did that.
Yeah.
But I really try to show that, no, you can study what you love, you can teach what you love. That's why I do video games. That's why I do the Kardashians. I hate the Kardashians, but I want them to sort of get a sense that whatever you're interested in, you can become scholarly and you can become enhanced by it.
If I could just add something, but I also think it's really important to show students that they can take in coursing a little bit further, because I'm sure tuition is just as expensive here as in Canada, so students have to class and say, well, why do I have to look at this? This makes sense, I'm paying $6,000 a course. So it is important to me to show the students that what we learned in my class, in some ways, can also be transferred a little bit further into your discipline, into your faculty. So you're not wasting your time. Of course, we don't say it from the very beginning, but we try to convey those connections.
We still have some. Yes.
I'm just curious, what are some of your experiences being in, university environment where there are colleagues perhaps that don't take the scholarship seriously, or there's conventions within that, institution that don't allow for the studies to, the research interests that you have to be, like you said, you're not able to get money for conferences. I'm kind of interested if I could just hear ways you manage that or navigate that kind of problem.
I put a few words into the title of my presentation to pull my human resources into giving me funding for this conference. I'm serious, that was why my title is as boring as it is, because I knew if I had actually put something what I really wanted to, they would have said, no, this is just BS. So that's one thing, and the other thing is, to be honest with you, I don't have any colleagues who share my interests, so I teach courses that are designed by other people, except for one that I just created this summer, where I had a free hand of everything. That was after about 2 years of negotiations, and people who had no idea what I was doing, because my master's in social linguistics, my PhD in translation studies, they had no idea what I was doing, and yet they were questioning absolutely everything. So I encounter resistance all the time. So I become, and of course being from a former communist country, I'm very sneaky about how I go about things. So, having a very good leader, has taught me that you can get your things done if you kind of shift towards, what the masses want. So that's
I'm kind of lucky, as Sarah said, I'm kind of lucky, as Sarah said, there's this active student community, metal student community on campus, and none of what I do wouldn't be possible without them. In the sense that they've been able to convince, let's say, my chair, that if they put a metal class on the books, there'll be hundreds of students. Literally, when I had my class, they had a cap of 120 students. I had 40 students, which is a good number, but that's how inflated the metal community is in the administration sense. So I have an easier time with people. I had to show them that it's real. I had to provide a list of what we were going to study, but there's so much great metal scholarship that I have no problem with. So this is what we're going to do.
Thank you very much.
I don't know how many of you missed the middle market last night, but it was really, really successful. So much so that Kate Koish, who had the skulls over here, she'll be back tomorrow, tabling during the academic conferences during the day. She'll be here from about 12 to 3. She'll be set up over on the side if anybody's interested in her stuff. And it's posted all over everywhere, so just find it on Facebook or on the website. There's a link to her page.